There she is. See.
This meeting is being recorded.
Hey guys.
Good morning.
Hey everyone. Welcome. I am so excited for our guest speaker today, the amazing Ray Boyd, who I met in Chicago while we were at National Conference. And we had so many team members that are working during the day that they're like, please record this. Like, we really want to hear it. And so we'll probably have some more joining us live, but we definitely have some that want to hear the recording too. So this was a great time for Ray, and we're so glad he took time out of his schedule to be with us today. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to speaker view, and then we're going to introduce Ray. All right, so Ray was released from the Connecticut Department of Correction on November 15th, 2021, after serving 29 and a half years of a 50-year term for a crime that was committed when he was just 17 years old. During his incarceration in 2015, he co-founded the Skills of Socialization, the SOS program, at the Osborne Correctional Institute, and in 2018, he co-founded the TRUE, T-R-U-E, re-entry program at the Cheshire Correctional Institute, where the program was aired on 60 Minutes News magazine. Since his release from incarceration, he has worked at Lewis Real Estate while attending real estate school. He volunteers his time to abolish the American prison industry complex and solitary confinement with Connecticut. Stop solitary confinement while advocating for second chance offenders. He is the author of The Model Inmate, which explores his time of incarceration. That's a book if anybody would like to read it. And he looks to share his lived experience with all so that it may benefit the lives of others. It almost makes me want to cry, you guys. I was so inspired by Ray when I met him. I knew I wanted you guys to hear his story too. And I was so happy that he agreed to share it with us on Zoom. So Ray, I will go ahead and turn the time over to you and let you share a little bit about your story with our team.
Okay, well, I appreciate everyone for attending today. First and foremost, Kelly, I appreciate you staying in contact with me after we met in Chicago. It was quite an experience being able to meet you and being able to talk with you and share my story with you as we traveled on the bus, and just block out everything that was taking place around us and create some creative dialogue that led to today's event. So for those of you that are in attendance, I wanted to just share a little bit about my background with you. I'm from New Haven, Connecticut, the home of Yale University. I grew up, I'm one of 9 children. I'm 6 boys and 3 girls that my mother raised in a single parent home. At the age of 12 or 13, I began to get involved in illicit activities, which ultimately led to me selling drugs. And then by age 17, I was charged with the crime of murder. However, because of my activities and became so lucrative with dealing drugs during this time, I was out on $1.3 million worth of bonds. And I was out on 8 other cases prior to me being incarcerated. So one would think that once I got charged with murder, that the illicit activity would eventually stop. However, it didn't, because again, I'm one of 9, and 5 of my other brothers were actively involved in illicit drug sales, and 2 of my sisters at this time. So my ultimate goal, my idea as a minor to get involved in drugs was because I was one of 9 children that my mother was raising on public assistance at this time. And I just thought that I needed more. And this was my personal thoughts, that I needed more than what my mother was giving me during this time. And my mother was providing for us the best she could, but there was just something there that I wanted an extra pair of sneakers when we went to school, when it was time to go back to school, or it may have been like my mom cooked lunch and dinner, and I may wanted an extra snack in between. I may wanted a sub and a bag of chips and a soda. So early on, around the age of 12, I began looking out for the older guys in my community. And that developed trust with them to where you start looking out, and then they start sending you to the store. and one guy will send you to the store and he'll give you a $20 bill, and he only want a soda and a bag of potato chips, and he tells you to keep the change. So you have, back then, I would say it's in the early 80s, I would probably have about $17 worth of change that he allowed me to take. But at the same time, this person is cultivating me to become a part of the illicit activities that he's running in the streets. And he sees potential in me that I don't see within myself. So over the years, that developed into me doing hand-to-hand transactions. And ultimately into 1992, my family was arrested. They were number one on Janet Reno. I don't know if any of you are familiar with attorney Janet Reno. They were on Janet Reno's number one list to take off the streets of the city of New Haven when Clinton came into office. So by June of 1992, several of my family members were arrested on federal charges and sent to federal prison. And I was ultimately tried and convicted and charged as an adult and sent to the Connecticut Department of Corrections, where I was sentenced to 50 years, and I spent 29 and a half years in the Connecticut Department of Corrections for the crime that I committed. So what I would like for any of you that may have any questions, that may want to know what it's like on a day-to-day basis, what these lived experiences were like for me, to ask questions. So my thing is to be able to interact with the public, to let them know that, you know, if you have anybody that's close to you that you may see going down the wrong path, you may want to, you know, say, okay, here's this book that I think you should read, because my personal opinion with prison is not trying. There's a thing going on with mass incarceration now where everyone's trying to reimagine prison and what prison should look like for individuals that are confined in prison. And I'm contrary to those beliefs of trying to reimagine what bondage should look like for juveniles that are sentenced to life in prison. I was a juvenile, and I'm considered a lifer in the state of Connecticut because a 50-year sentence is considered life for a juvenile offender in the state of Connecticut. So I can't.
Yeah, sorry. Finish your thought, and then I'll ask the question I have.
So I can't begin to fathom how I can make such a small space a better space for a child to live in.
Right. So what I found so inspiring from your story, and this is what I want you to share, and then of course people can ask questions too, is I want you explain to me kind of when you were in there, what your mindset was and the way that you improved yourself in a couple of the activities you did in prison. I'd like you to speak to that for, you know, a brief minute, because a lot of people, they have something happen in their life, prison, you know, a lifetime illness, you know what I mean? Like divorce, like they have a life-changing event where they're, you know, where they feel like their life could be over. And I feel like that I'm sure that went through your mind when you got put in. And then I want you to share with the team how you changed that and the things that you did in prison to improve yourself. And then we can open it up for other questions too. Okay. Would you mind?
Well, definitely. Well, first off, when I became incarcerated, I was living a certain culture, which is what one would call or consider the drug culture. So again, I was involved in illicit activities. So once I came to jail, there's no light switch that turns off one mindset. You know, he has to mature and grow. I was a 7th grade dropout prior to my incarceration. I was reading on a 3rd or 4th grade level. And statistically now, as we look back, there's scientific evidence that's out there that says if a child is failing at a 3rd or 4th grade level, more than likely that child will be introduced into the prison system. This is nationally at some point in his teenage years. So one would say that it's by design. Others would say that, you know, it's not. It's just poor choices in decision making. And also science is now proven that children can't make the right choices as adults could. so they can't be held responsible as the same as adults for the crimes that they committed under the age of 18. The United States Supreme Court made that decision and ruling on June 25th of 2012 in Miller versus Alabama case. But for me, going to prison as a 7th grade dropout, reading on the 3rd or 4th grade level, I digressed even further back into illicit activities within the prison system because one, gang violence in Connecticut in the early 90s was at an all-time high, and you're either predator or you're either prey. So I began to associate with some gang members while I was incarcerated from the city of New Haven. The gang violence in the prison system at this time was pretty much fractured by neighborhoods or cities throughout the state of Connecticut, and got involved in some of those activities and was ultimately charged with a gang assault. And once I was charged with the gang assault, I pretty much found myself by myself. And once I found myself by myself in a gang unit, 23 hours lockdown, I began to do some introspection on what I wanted my life to be. And I just wanted to, I still have family members that were supporting me. I had a son 6 months after my incarceration, and his mother was still very supportive of me during this time. I had several friends that had chose different paths in life that had linked back up with me and were supportive of me. So I said, I didn't want to be the same person that I was that got me into prison, even though I was sentenced to 50 years. And when I without saying, it goes without saying that I thought that prison would be my demise. I would never leave prison ever again and ever come home to my family. However, the one thing I knew I needed to do, I needed to educate myself. So the library, in absence of funds to purchase my own books, I began to go to the library and I began to read and I began to edify myself. I knew that I had to be able to speak a certain language that would separate me from my peers in order to, because everything I believe in life is about relatability. It's not about where we at financially. It's not about our race. It's if we can relate to one another, we can make the world a better place. And the only way we can relate to one another is through communication. So we have to be able to effectively be able to communicate with one another and tell each other and share with one another either what we're going through or what's on our mind at this time. And if it's a problem, therefore we can find a solution to that problem that may arise. So the library became my best friend. And then I started spending a lot of time purchasing books on self-help and just reading other things other than urban fiction and novels that would keep one in a certain mind frame, because the books all end the same. Either someone gets murdered or someone goes to jail. So I try to read a lot of things on self-help. And I read a book by author Tony Martin. It was actually on Marcus Garvey. And in there, Marcus Garvey was saying, if you read one book a year, that's 52, one book a week, that's 52 books in a year. And in 5 years, you read 260 books as opposed to the man who hasn't read one in that time. And I started reading about statistics of individuals that were incarcerated and how majority of the population incarceration were functionally illiterate. So you had guys that couldn't read or couldn't write, but probably could talk good. They have what one would call or consider to be game, and from that, you just had a whole bunch of individuals walking around. They didn't want to be vulnerable. They didn't want to tell you where they were at with their learning experience, because they didn't want you to look down on them because they came to prison with wearing such of a badge of honor of being a tough guy or, being a leader. So to expose the fact that they couldn't read or they couldn't write publicly, because a lot of them would come to me individually and seek my help or seek my assistance. And they would let me know, like, look, I have a hard time doing reading or I have a hard time writing. they didn't want to be taught. Some guys don't want to be taught, and you can offer them that assistance, and they're like, nah, because in that environment, they don't want to be seen as vulnerable. You know, they don't want to be seen as vulnerable. So I just took it upon myself to do the best that I could be, so that if there was ever a chance. I remember one time a counselor asking me why, and inmates begin to ask me, why do I do the things that I do, knowing that I had a 50-year sentence and that I was never getting out. And I always told them that I would much rather be prepared and never get out than to not be prepared and get out. Because if I was not prepared and I got out, I would be the same person I was before I came in. But if I knew that if I changed my thoughts and I changed my actions, that would also manifest a change in my character on a daily basis, I would be a different person. And that has led me to where I am today. I'm a completely different person than I was at my 17-year-old self. There was never an idea that I would become an author. I've written 3 books now. I'm working on my 4th book. I have a book out now. I'm a restorative justice advocate. I'm a juvenile justice advocate. I'm a consulting. So there's so many doors and opportunities that have opened up for me from just doing the right thing.
So what are some of the subjects? I know we got, of course, into the cooking subject, and I want you to speak to that too, but what kind of subjects interested you when you were picking out your books to read and stuff like that, where you started, you know, like, I want to know how you arranged to be able to cook in prison, because obviously to cook, you need knives. Like, to me, that would be like a little, you know what I mean? Like, they might be a little hesitant about that. So I want you to kind of speak to that.
No, there are knives in prison. However, each knife is hooked to a steel cable that is then it's then padlocked to the arm of the table where you're working at. So I spent probably about 17 years, close to 18 years, cooking in the kitchen. And my reason for going to the kitchen initially was for a day a week, because if you work in the kitchen in prison, it's 365 days a year with no days off, no vacations. So I said, you know, I would go there, and for every 7 days that you work, a day would be taken off your sentence. So that was my initial thing to go in there. And then once I got into the kitchen, I found that I liked cooking. And so liking cooking, there's a book company that's in Falls Village, Connecticut called Edward R. Hamilton. And I was going through a catalog one day. He had a culinary arts encyclopedia. And I was like, this is the perfect book. And it was on sale for about $5. So I bought the book. And once I bought the book, my supervisors became intrigued. They're like, you're sitting here on your break and you're reading about cooking. What have you learned? Pretty much. And I was like, well, you know, I learned how to make, well, it tells you how to make puff pastry. It tells you how to make, you know, pie crust from scratch and all of these other things. And at one time I asked him, I was like, why do we buy this stuff when we can buy the ingredients to make it? And he was like, well, we normally don't get guys that have the passion like you that want to make stuff. So we buy it already prefabbed and just put it in the oven or whatever. So I was like, all right. So one day I was like, oh, I wish one of my supervisors like, you see anything in there you like? And I was like, man, I see these butterscotch Scotties that I want to make. And he was like, well, what do you need? And I was like, I said, we got oatmeal, we got the eggs, we got brown sugar, you know, baking powder, we got everything we need except the butterscotch chips to go with it. So he's like, I'll be right back. He left the prison, went down to the store and got 6 pounds of butterscotch chips. He's like, just make them for everybody. So I was like, okay. And then from there, it just spiraled. Like, they would always ask me, you want to make something for the fellas? You want to make something for the fellas? I would make pizza. I would make puff pastry. I would make bear claws. And it just, anything that I seen in the book that I wanted to experience, and we had the ingredients there, I would be open to, you know, the challenge of trying to make it for everybody.
Okay, talk about the most popular prisoner in the jail. Like, I'm sure they're like, give him whatever he wants. We want some treats today. I just love that part of the story. It's so inspiring to me. Like, you just literally, it was a talent, and
Yeah.
that you developed it in prison to me is amazing. And then the fact that you created the opportunity for you to be able to cook in there and make
Yeah.
things just is incredible to me. Like,
Yeah.
that's so awesome.
Well, yeah, well, you know, they say a way to a man's heart is through a stomach. And because I was making things on their budget and it was pretty much quote unquote free, a lot of the officers started requesting that I cook for them when they would have what's called officer of the quarter. So they would be like, boy, what are you making? I was like, I'm gonna make you some carrot cake. I'm gonna make you some cream cheese. I'm gonna make you some cinnamon buns. And they would have like a family day where they would bring their families in. And it just like holidays, I would bake 80 apple pies and give away 50, you know, and during Christmas time. And I would make sure the officers, you come in, you take a pie home, or I would make sweet potato pie. I can make 100 6-inch sweet potato pies in a day. So it's just, you know, I get 2 partners to help me and we just sit there and knock it out. And over time, it just became like Boyd runs the kitchen. The supervisors don't even run the kitchen anymore. He does everything. And they just, you know, I like the relationship that I built with them because again, they got to see me for the person that I am and not the title that was placed on me for the crime that I committed.
Yeah, I love that. Can you guys see why I wanted him on our team? But anyway, what I want to get to is one other thing that I want you to speak to, and then we can open it up for questions. I asked you the question, why do you think that you had this mindset shift and no one else in the prison did? And you spoke to like the blame game, like what some prisoners do with blaming. And I'd like you to speak for that. And then anyone else who has a question, I'd like for you guys to be able to ask Ray Boyd a couple of questions too. But there was a couple points that I definitely wanted him to touch on because it was so moving to me when we were talking together. So if you'll speak to that, and then we'll open it up for anyone else that has questions.
For me, like a lot of men carried a burden for the crimes that they committed pretty much throughout their whole incarceration. I tell people all the time that it took me 7 seconds to commit the act of taking a man's life that I will never be able to give back, you know. And I'm pretty sure some of the other guys, it may have taken them less or may have taken them a couple more seconds than what it took me. But I think when we come in prison, we're all afraid, and a lot of men won't say this because again, they don't want to be vulnerable, they don't want to be seen as prey. So we all decide that we have to act a certain way. Everyone in prison isn't tough, you know, but a lot of these guys don't want to take responsibility. So we play the blame game, which is I'm mad at the guy who told on me. I'm mad at the officer who arrested me. I'm mad at the prosecutor who prosecuted me. I'm mad at the judge who sentenced me to the time that he sentenced me. You're mad at everybody except yourself for the choices that you've made in life to commit the acts that you've committed that landed you where you're at. And I think for the reason why my time was so much better for me, for one, once I became mature, I decided that I needed to take responsibility, one, for the act that I committed that took a man's life. And I needed to forgive those that may have told on me or written statements on me, because I didn't want to carry those burdens of revenge into my life where I thought, oh, if I see this person, I'm going to do something to them. No, the past was my past. Again, I'm a different person. And I just didn't want to bring that into my life once I came out. I knew what I wanted for my life. And like right now, I'm married, you know, we have a home, we have 2 cars, and people can't believe how within the last 9 months, my life has taken on like a life of its own after being incarcerated for so long. They say there's guys out that's been out here for 30 years that aren't doing as nearly as what you're doing. And you've only been home, you haven't even been home a year. You know, I'm going to conferences in Chicago for restorative justice and trauma, and I'm doing things in Florida on on being an author and speaking to youth in Florida. And it's just so many opportunities that I'm blessed to have. And because of the act that came out of a bad situation.
It's just incredible to me. And a lot of times, I mean, most of our team members that I know of haven't been in prison, but the mindset that you had is just incredible to me, because a lot of times we can get hung up on being mad about situations that happen to us, mad about situations that maybe happened because of choices that we make. And when we're in that mad, angry, like closed off space, you can't create anything. You can't be creative and change anything when you're in that state. And that's what spoke to me so much, is the way that, you changed your mindset and created something out of a pretty, like difficult situation. It was just inspiring. So, well, we're at about 10:30. I want to open it up to anyone else who has questions for Ray. I could sit here and talk to him all day. I just think he's so fascinating. But do you guys have any questions for him? Do you have any questions about prison life, about, his experience, about mindset shift? Anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask Ray? Yeah, Dave, go ahead.
Not so much a question, but when he was talking about, as teenagers, we always want something and stuff. And I was in the same situation, and I lied about my age and went and got a job because that's what my dad told me to do. But I do have a sister that is a paralegal, and she always works for the defense, and she could speak to it more. I don't know how they figure out sentences for crimes and stuff, but they're never sentenced equally either for the same crime. And that is a big issue, I believe, too. And what does 50 years really do for the person who commits crime to sit in jail for 50 years? It just really doesn't make sense. What opportunities are you getting in jail to help prisoners do that? It's like, yeah, it's not in my wheelhouse per se, or my consciousness what that would look like, but I never understand the 50 years.
Like
What
you
is that?
said, Ray would have been almost 70. If he
Yeah,
did his full sentence, I mean, yeah, I can see why it would be considered life. Like, that's a whole life.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ray, you were going to say something.
Well, the one thing I want to say to Dave is just that my contrition for my acts is sincere. And I can't, we're always asked, like, well, how much is enough? Like, I can't really say, because I wasn't harmed by the act itself. When I say that, I mean, I'm not the victim's family. And it may be a question that you would have to ask them, or you would have to ask my family, because not only did I commit a crime or act against the victim's family, I always say that I should have been charged with robbery, because I robbed my son of a father. I robbed my first wife of a husband. I robbed my mother of her son for 30 years. I robbed my brothers and sisters of a loved one. So being away for all of that time, I'm trying to reconnect with loved ones that I haven't seen in 29 and a half years. They wish that I was home earlier. I always say that there's a slogan that I use, that you can't force the sun to shine before it's time, meaning that I came out at an appointed time to be able to do the work that I need. I think if I had came out any sooner or any later, I wouldn't be where I'm at now. So I believe that I can't give an answer in numbers of how do I think that the time that they're giving is astronomical for the crimes that are committed. Sure. But when you sit here and you have to rationalize the act of taking one's life, you can never put a number upon for that act. Like, you can never say that, okay, maybe they should have just gave him 20 years, maybe they should have just gave him 50 years. I can attest to the fact that the individual that I was at that time, I needed to be removed from society so that I can fix all the wrong that was going on in me.
So incredible. Speaking to that, Nicole has a question in the chat and she said, how did you overcome the get them before they get you mindset in prison? Do you know what I mean? Like you were talking about the
Yes.
predator versus prey. She wanted to know a little bit more about that.
Well, the predator versus prey, it's not necessarily like the Connecticut prison system, although when I came in, the gang violence was at an all-time high in the early 90s. It wasn't to necessarily get them before they get you. It was if you need to align yourself with someone so that you're not taken advantage of. You know, your sneakers are not stolen, or your commissary bin is not, bust into, and your food is stolen. So it wasn't necessarily an act of violence where I needed to stab someone before that person stabbed me, or, anything like that. But there are situations where things turn physical, but my approach has always been one of where to try to talk to the individual first and see where the problem lies, because a lot of times when you speak with people, you see that you don't like a person because the person may have looked at you the wrong way, and we're living in a hyper vigilant society, meaning prison, where we're all looking at each other some type of way to make sure that we make it through the day. You don't know if an individual has a weapon. I always used to equate my time in prison to that of like a career where you're walking in a field and you don't see the mines, but at any given moment, these individuals, the minds of the individuals can blow up on you in prison. Just like a mine, walking in a minefield, and you don't see the mines, and you can step into a mine and lose your life. So my time in prison was equated to that, because you can just be walking down the hall minding your business and the person doesn't know you, but you don't know what type of day that person had. You don't know what mental state that person is in that day. Last night, his girlfriend may have told him she can't do it no more. She doesn't want to be in a relationship no more. Or it could have been one of his kids' mothers that just said, I'm not bringing the children up there anymore. I don't want them to see prison anymore. And you have X amount of years. So your relationship with your kids is non-existent anymore. And you happen to bump into that person the next morning in line for breakfast. And next thing you know, it's an act of violence because of his mental state. So you just never know where a person's mind is at on a daily basis in prison. And you're talking about waking up to 3,000 different personalities.
Right.
You
Yeah,
know?
that's interesting to think about. You bring a whole different perspective to it. Does anyone else have a question for Ray that they'd like to ask? While they're thinking, Ray, I would like to know, how long were you in prison before you got put in solitary? And then how long were you in solitary before did they ever move you back into like the regular system?
Yes, I was in in 1999, Connecticut transferred 500 of what they considered their worst prisoners to the state of Virginia. And I was one of the first ones on the bus to Virginia, we stayed at Wallens Ridge State Prison in Virginia, which is a supermax level 6 facility. Anywhere you went in that facility, you were pretty much under armed guard. If you Google it, you'll see it. It sits 2,700 feet above sea level on the top of a mountain, where it just took a blasting cap and blew it out and just built a prison there. I was there for about a year, and then I did close to 6 months of solitary in Connecticut. And what that consists of is just 24 hours a day in your cell. You may come out for a shower Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and sometimes, depending on the officers or how the facility is running, you may get an hour on the yard each day. Well, in a cage, pretty much. They're in a kennel. And I didn't accept rec that much because of the conditions, and I think that I watched a lot of men succumb to mental psychosis in that environment. And I was fortunate enough, because I had started reading that, that what kept me sane. in that space, you know. And I would sometimes when I have speaking engagements now, I still tell people that I've yet to see how solitary confinement has affected me, you know, because I'm still dealing with some of that stuff coming out or reliving it, you know, as I speak of.
Yeah. Interesting. Lynn, did I see you raise your hand? Do you have a question? Yeah, just take yourself off mute.
Well, I do remember meeting you when we were in Chicago. I was on the bus with you. And but I didn't hear all the details that Kelly did because it was kind of noisy on the bus. But so you cooked for 17 years and got all that time off from cooking?
Yes.
That's awesome.
I had earned 14 years of good time while I was in prison. And that all pretty much came from working in the kitchen.
And so you were in federal prison?
No, state prison.
Oh, I was gonna say, because I thought federal, they never took any time off. So that's what I was
Oh yeah. No, I was in state prison. I was charged with murder at the age of 17, and I became incarcerated at the age of 20 and came home at 49.
Thanks. Lynn, do you have anything else? There's one more in the chat.
I really enjoyed listening to you today, though.
It was, I know, he's such a great speaker, really has a gift for it. Okay, Nicole also wanted to know, how are you able to get out before your 50-year sentence? Are you still on parole?
Yes, I'm currently on parole, and my parole officer and his supervisor are pretty upset that other states are calling on me to speak and do some programming, and they're not utilizing me here in Connecticut. Excuse me. I was in 2012, I'll take you back in 2012, there was a landmark case, Miller versus Alabama, United States Supreme Court, and it made it unconstitutional to sentence juveniles as adults for those who committed crimes before their 18th birthday. So because I was charged with murder at the age of 17, my sentence became unconstitutional. In the state of Connecticut, there was no parole for the crime of murder prior to this law. So what Connecticut redid, they went in and they rewrote their laws for juvenile offenders to be able to go up for parole and show that they've matured throughout their time of incarceration, and that they're not the person that they were prior to their incarceration, even though they were thrust into an adult setting at such a young age. Yeah, I was paroled on July 14th, and I came home on November 15th of last year, and I still have 2.5 years of parole, and I'm looking to be discharged off that pretty soon because of the work that I've been doing in the community. In my community, I do what's called Project Safe Neighborhood, and what it is we go out and I talk to individuals that are currently on parole or facing a charge with a gun charge, and I speak to them about the poor decision making of carrying guns and what how I made that decision and what it ultimately led me to serving a 50-year sentence and then coming home. And I also do what's called a Project Longevity, and Project Longevity is also on a federal level where individuals are facing gun charges or just came home from the federal system for gun charges.
So fascinating. Anybody else have a question? Yeah, Chris has one, and I can't see everybody. So if you have a question, go ahead and take yourself off mute. But yeah, we'll go ahead and let Chris ask hers, and then we'll wrap it up in the next 5 minutes or so.
Thanks. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us, Ray. It's super inspirational. And my husband and I are both teachers, and he currently teaches in inner city Denver, which is mostly, his students are pretty much exclusively Hispanic and Black.
Mm-hmm.
Last year was horrible. It was, and of course it was post-COVID, but they're so mean to each other, and they're mean to him, and they're calling each other names and calling him names and tried to get him fired and almost accomplished that. So my question is, like, what can he say to make a difference to them? And like in the bigger picture in our world, what can we do to make a difference?
I would when you speak about Black and Hispanics or Black and brown people, majority of these individuals are coming from one, there's a great divide between Black and brown in the Midwest. The further west you go, the further the divide is. They don't like each other for whatever reason. And they just go at each other. And when that happens, a lot of time we have to look at the root of the problem. I think we take things at face value and we just see bad children. But when we look at things, that's when we take it at face value. But when we strive to get to the root of a lot of these issues, we have to look at, okay, how is the mother doing in the home? How is the father doing in the home? Are these kids eating in the home before they come to school? A lot of those things they don't have. I didn't have, growing up as a child. So that's why I began doing some of the things that I've done. But I think that if like someone would say, how do you tell a child not to sell drugs without a solution to them not selling drugs? If you can't give this child a job, because the child may be going to school every day, but that child's not telling his teacher that, look, my mother is at home getting high and my father's high off crystal meth all day, and I have little brothers and sisters that don't have any food. So I have to come to school because I want to do good and I want to get an education and get out. But at the same time, if I'm not trying to provide for my family, DCS is going to come in and they're going to snatch the kids away and my home is going to be broken. So I think one thing that your husband could do, I try to isolate, because the more you isolate, meaning that if he speaks to an individual one-on-one, it's probably as opposed to a group setting, the vulnerability comes out. The kid will begin to open up and let you know what's going on at home. They can be abused at home. And they're not telling anyone, because in their world, no one cares, because they expect someone to either see the signs, and the signs is the nonverbals. How does this kid come to school every day? Does this kid come to school with his head held down or his head held high every day? Or is there a frown on this kid's face every day of school? There's a problem. And how do we intervene? And I just don't think that, like, me personally, they say that a lot of parents say that the schools are failing our kids. No, we're failing our kids because we're not listening to our kids. A lot of parents just tell their kids, just go to school and get an education. But how can you tell a kid to go to school and get an education when the education system is not designed? It's flawed. It's flawed. When we look at our system today, our education system is flawed. We know that our education system is teaching things that they should not teach. However, because we don't want to collect millions of textbooks and change the history that's being taught, we say it's okay. And then the ability of I think the ability of a great teacher is to be able to identify with the students and what the students want. Because it's not always what the teacher wants. Sometimes a teacher, a power trip and say, just like some parents power trip, oh, I'm the parent. You can't tell me what you want to do. And the whole time the child is telling you what's right. But because you're the parent, you don't want to hear it. And sometimes teachers are doing that. But if a teacher can identify with the needs of his student, it can, the teacher can be able to craft a curriculum. It can be the same curriculum, but make it fun. Make the child want to engage in learning what it is that you're trying to teach them. Don't be so textbook and so rote and mechanical that the child is bored. He's laying his head on the table all day throughout school because, Mr. Smith, you just don't have it. We have to be creative, especially in this day and age and I say this day and age because of the computer era and the cell phones. And I tell a person now, a 10-year-old child is actually 18 mentally when it comes to computers, because we would not know the things that we knew when we were 10 years old that this 10-year-old would know now. So we have to be innovative with what and how we present these old ideas to these new children.
I love the idea of, I know this would take a lot of time, like for a teacher, but that idea of one-on-ones with each student to just even then that student would know that someone cared. You know what I mean? Like that's such a powerful statement. Even if it took 2 months to do a one-on-one with them, you know what I mean? Like it would upgrade their experience of at least knowing someone cared. So great. Well, I know we can't have Ray stay on forever, but I hope you guys got as much out of it as I did. Like I just was so inspired by his story and the story about overcoming obstacles and mindset. I just definitely wanted all of you to hear it as well. So Ray, thank you again from the bottom of our heart for sharing with our team. I know, I love you so much. And we're definitely going to share the recording because there were several team members that wanted, you know, they asked last night, they're like, you're going to record this, right? It's going to be recorded, right? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. We're going to share it with you guys. So thank you for everyone that could be on live and for Ray for taking time out of his schedule. And I hope everyone has a great day and is a little bit more inspired than when they got on in the call in the first place. So thanks guys. Thanks again, Ray. Love you.
Thank you all. I appreciate it. Love you all.
Bye.
Bye bye.